and welcome to the First United Methodist Church in Bowling Green, Missouri. We hope that you enjoy what you're about to see, and you can find us at the corner of Broadway and Church Streets at 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings, or you can find us at bgmethodist.org and on Facebook at Bowling Green First United Methodist Church. Today, we start our new sermon series where we're asking the big questions. We've got 3 sermons in the series, and then for the 4th Sunday, I'll be taking your questions, so come ready with them and be ready to ask, and maybe we'll see what answers we can come up with. Today we start with our first question: why do good people suffer?
As we come together this morning, we're in the first Sunday of this new series. We're going to be asking the big questions. So I thought I'd start off with a nice, light, and easy one for this morning. And that is, why do good people suffer? Or the other way that we ask this oftentimes is, why do bad things happen to good people? I know that's a question you all have probably either been asked or have asked yourselves. It's a question that I have asked, and I've been asked it multiple times. Where are we getting it? Somehow I managed to hit the buttons without me thinking of it. Getting ahead of myself. I've been asked that question a lot. And I think when we approach this idea of suffering, and where does suffering come from, what does it mean? When we ask this question, we've got to think of the question I think we're really asking. It's not that we're asking, why do good people suffer, but oftentimes we're asking, why do good Christian people suffer? Because we've got this concept that's out there of what suffering is supposed to be, and that if you suffer, then you must have done something wrong. I think the gremlins are just out all over this morning. We had this concept of suffering that's out there that says, if you suffer, you're doing something wrong, you're doing something bad. And we're going to get to the way, towards the end of this, we're going to get to the ways in which that gets put out there, gets reinforced in different ways. But we're going to start, though, with kind of beginning to get at this. Because you know and I know that we suffer. And that that's not something we can get away from, and that we've seen good people who are good people suffer. And so we struggle with this question. And it's hard. And it's one that we're always going to struggle with. As much as I think and I know, this is still one of those places that is difficult. And so we're going to kind of get into this. And what is it that's going on when we're suffering? And what is God's response to this? And so the first place we start is with a couple of things to remember. The first thing to remember as we go into this is that God made it. Whatever it is, God made it. That's the first thing we've got to remember, is that all of this that we're in, all this world that we are a part of, God made it. Now, along with that, one of the it's that God made is that He made us, and He made us different from everything else around us, and He gave us free will, which means that we have choices. We can choose to do right things, we can choose to do wrong things, we can choose to do all sorts of things. We have that ability to choose. And so that's part of this also that fits into all of this. And so if we're going to put together a perfect world to live in that dealt with suffering, and in fact where there was no suffering, then some of the characteristics of this would be, of course, no suffering, and God would respond immediately to our cries for help and our struggles and our frustrations, or I should say that we would understand God's response immediately in those times and in those struggles. And so that's in a perfect world we would do that. And in a perfect world there would probably be no consequences then, because if there's no suffering and we understand how God responds immediately, then there aren't going to be any consequences for the things that happen and the things that go on. That would be in a perfect world that we would try and put together on our own, that dealt with suffering in a way that we would all like, where we didn't have any of it. That's not the world we live in, unfortunately. Now, I think part of this, though, is that we do live in a perfect world. The world we live in is good. God, when He made it in Genesis 1, He said, it's good. Part of that good, though, is that it works the way that God made it. The world around us works the way that God made it to work. Meaning that, these things are all done for a reason and for a purpose. I've heard it said in lots of different places that we are, we're on this great big ball of rock that is flying through space, but all of these things work to keep us alive on there. This is the way that God made all of that to work. Now, the other part of this is that it's going to respond to maintain that design. If I've got a big pile of rocks over here, and I reach down and find just that right rock at the bottom of the pile and pull it out, the whole thing comes falling down because that's what rocks do. That's what they're supposed to do. That's how they are made. That is how it all works. And so if we do that, then the world responds to maintain things the way that they are designed to do. Now, the last part of that, though, is that because we have choice, we have that ability to choose, then we get in the way. We get in the way of the world working and of those things working the way that they are supposed to work. And that's where things begin to get hard. Whether we're the person who is standing down there at the bottom grabbing just that right rock, and the whole thing comes tumbling down, or more often than not, if we're talking about natural disasters especially, it's that maybe we live in areas that are prone to hurricanes or big storms or earthquakes or tornadoes or river flooding. Where I came from before this, we were used to the river flooding. We're also used to kind of crazy weather. I knew farmers who in one summer had both lost crops due to flooding and lost crops due to being scorched because not enough water, and sometimes in the same field. That's part of where we live. The things that we deal with, that's part of the way the world works and where we find ourselves. And sometimes we get in the way in the middle of that. Now, we can't always explain it, though. And that's one of the other hard parts about this, is that we can't explain how all these things work a lot of times. And that's where we struggle. For as much as we know, one of the things that we know is how much we don't know. And every time I've said that sentence this morning, it wants to get longer all the time. Because there's only so much that we can know, so many things that we can discover and find out. And there is always way more than that is waiting outside for us to still be found and be explained. So we can't explain it. Especially when we move from natural disasters down to stuff on our level that involves us and who we are. We can't explain a lot of those things. Now, there are some things on there that we can know, and that is that our bodies break. That no matter what we do, no matter where we find ourselves, the bodies that we have, they're going to break, because at some point in time, our physical bodies die. They wear out, things happen. If you're like me, you do silly things to yourself, and it's a wonder that you haven't lost any more limbs or had any more injuries than you've ever had in your life. This is part of who we are. One of the things I love about Psalm 139 is it says that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And we are. For all that our bodies can endure, for all the strength that they have, they are still very fragile, and they will break and fall apart, and that's part of the world that we live in. That's just the way that the world works. And you've got these lists on the inserts in your bulletin, and the last part of this is the things we can't explain. Our bodies are weak. That's the way the world works, and the best way that I can kind of summarize that is that sucks. There's just no way that we can get around it. It just is flat out hard. We can't, that just is the way that things work. But here's where we begin to see the good things that God does do in the midst of all of this. We remember that God knows us better than we know ourselves. We look back in the first 5 verses of Psalm 139. We see just kind of the beginning of what the psalmist is writing of how God knows us, of how He knows us from our tops to our bottoms, from our left to our right. All that we are, God knows about us. And that's good. That is good for us. Now, the trouble we have with that, though, is that sometimes in the middle of that, we get, in the middle of all that, is that we begin to think some other things. And that is that in the middle of that, sometimes we begin to look at, especially Psalm 139 and other places, we say, well, that means that God has a plan for us. Because God knows all of this about us. He has a plan for who we are and what we do and the way that the world is supposed to work around us. And that's the way it's supposed to go. Well, that's mostly because we can only handle one thing at a time. We can only handle one plan at a time, no matter how much of a multitasking genius I think I am. Reality has proven to be something very different, that I am not the multitasking genius that I think I am. I'm really good with one thing at a time. That's really what I do well. And so we've got to look at something a little bit differently. When God does this, He looks at us in a different way. He sees us when we are very young. He sees us when we are very old. He even sees us in the middle someplace where we are at that goofy place in the middle of our lives where we aren't young and we aren't old yet and we don't think we're old. God sees us in that place also. He also sees the world from our perspective. The way that we look at it, we see the world, He sees it that way. He also sees the world from the world. He sees us from the world's perspective, looking in. Sometimes He sees us that way also. He also sees us from the perspective of all the intersections and connections that we make with other people. All the places that we come together and our lives cross with the lives of others, He sees us there as well. Now, we can deal with one of those things at a time. We don't deal well with all of those things at any given time. And more often than not, they get jumbled in on top of themselves. And we would look at that. If all these things are stacked up on top of one another, we would look at that and say, that is a mess. That just is a mess. We can't deal with that. But God can make sense of that. He is the one that can make sense of all of that. He knows us from all of those different places all at one time. He can handle that. He can deal with that. And that is good news for us, because that means He doesn't have just a plan for us, but He has multiple plans for us. If you remember back to Psalm 139, this is verses 17 and the first part of verse 18. It said, the psalmist writes, God, your plans are incomprehensible to me. Their total number is countless. If I tried to count them, they outnumber the grains of sand. God doesn't have just one plan for us, but God has many plans for us, because He's already taken into account who we are and what we do and all the crazy things that go on around us. He has already got that and knows who we are and knows that's the way that things are going to go. And so He is ready for it. He knows that we don't deal well with just one thing, but that we've got to have multiple things, and He is ready for us. So when we start talking about suffering, this makes itself known, because when we suffer, it doesn't mean that God is mad at us. It doesn't mean that we have done something wrong in God's eyes and we are suffering because of it. That's not the way that works. Now, we may have done something silly or stupid, because I know I'm prone to doing those things, but it's not because God is mad at us. It's completely the opposite. God is still working for us. He is still wanting us to make it through this time of suffering and all of those things. He is still working for the other end of that. And He is still working in us and through us, trying to get us through what we're suffering for and struggling for. He's still working on that, no matter where we find it. But we've got to deal, though, with where this idea of suffering comes from that says God is mad at us. Because that's ultimately where we are. We can know and we can talk about all that we want that's not the way suffering works. But we've still got this idea that is out there that says if you suffer, it's because God is mad at you. And that's an image that gets portrayed on a regular basis through lots of different places, through lots of popular media outlets, because it's an easy message. It says if you suffer, you've done something wrong, and God is mad at you, and you just have to deal with it. And it comes at us from a number of different places. And the places where that comes at us the worst, or sometimes the places it comes from where it really shouldn't, is that the Christian media is really good at this. So if we're talking about books or movies or TV shows or anything else, they give us this same image, this same concept of suffering, because it's an easy one. It's one that sells really well, and it's one that sometimes we don't even realize that we're doing it. There's a couple of movies that have come out in recent years that are that demonstrate both sides of this. That demonstrate on the one side what we do when we get it wrong, and one that gets it right. In the last year, there's a movie that came out that a lot of people have seen, and a lot of people have seen a lot, and they get a lot out of it, and I'm glad that they do, but I tried to watch it, and I made it through 10 minutes of it, and I had to turn it off. But that was about 5 minutes longer than I thought I was going to be able to watch it. But that was the movie God's Not Dead. Now, I know lots of folks have seen that, but one of my issues that I have with that movie is the way that it presents suffering. Because it gives us these really one-dimensional stereotyped characters that are bad because they're bad, and they suffer because they're bad, and they don't have faith. And on the other side, you've got good people who are good people, and the times when they suffer is because they are suffering for God. That's the one exception to that rule, is that you can suffer if you're suffering because you're doing God's work. Now, sometimes bad people do suffer. Sometimes good people suffer for righteous and holy causes. But that's not the only ways that this works. And that leaves us with kind of this really bad image of what suffering is supposed to be and what suffering is. On the other side of that, there was a movie that came out in 2012 that I think gets it right. This is a movie called Courageous. Now, I have to admit, I was reluctant to see it. I had one of my folks kept poking me and prodding me and saying, "You need to watch this movie, you need to watch this movie, you need to watch this movie." And I'm like, I don't want to watch this movie. But I said, okay, finally, so I said, fine, I'll watch it, and I'll see it, and I will admit it is kind of campy, but given that I like to watch bad science fiction movies, I do campy really well, so that's okay. But it's got a good, solid message to it. You've got a group of guys who hurt, and who struggle, who suffer through a lot of things, but they are brought together through their faith, and they help each other out, and they support one another, even when one of them is really stupid. They continue to help him out and work with him, even though he's going through all of this stuff, because this is what God does. When we are suffering, we suffer because that's the world we live in. Because the world works in the way it does, and sometimes because of the choices we make or the choices other people make, suffering happens, and it will happen in our lives. We can't get away from that. But what God does do, because He knows us so well, because He knows what we need, because He's already got all of these plans in place, is He puts people into our lives that can help us in our times of suffering. Sometimes that means it helps make that time shorter. Sometimes it doesn't make it any shorter, but it helps us get through. And it helps us understand and work through our times of struggle and suffering. That's what God does. On the flip side of that, sometimes He puts us into the lives of other people when they're hurting and they're suffering, because we can help them in their time of need and struggle and suffering. We see this happen all throughout Scripture, and we see this also happen in one of the greatest ways when God looks down on a suffering and a struggling world and says they need help, and He sends Jesus, His Son, to come down into that world, not because Jesus is a powerful healer and teacher or a miracle worker and all of those things, but because Jesus is the right person for the job to help us in our times of struggle and suffering, in our times of need. That's what God does. He sends people into our lives. He sent the Savior into our life and our community to help us in those times. As we go through this week, I invite you to look at your life and look to see where has God sent people into your life to help you through the hard times. But also look to see where is God sending you into someone else's life to help them in times of hurt and struggle and suffering, because that is what God is doing to help build us together as a community, to help us grow stronger, and to help us help one another. Let us go and do that and find those folks and find those places in this next week and the weeks to come. Amen.